Professor Zandor Quills adjusted his ocular enhancements as he surveyed the lecture hall. 350 graduate students from 20 different star systems filled the tiered seating of Advanced Xenomythology 101. The atmosphere regulation system hummed efficiently, maintaining the perfect balance of nitrogen, methane, and oxygen compounds to accommodate the diverse respiratory needs of his students. Initiating formal academic session in precisely 7.4 seconds, Quills announced, his tentacle-like appendages deftly arranging the holographic displays around his podium. His exoskeleton gleamed under the adaptive lighting system that automatically adjusted to each species' visual comfort zone. The Galactic Academic Coalition's most prestigious xenomythology program deserved nothing less than absolute precision. After all, this was the cutting edge of mythological research, and today's lecture promised to be particularly fascinating. Quills had spent the last 30 galactic cycles studying the persistent myths of humans that appeared across countless cultures throughout the galaxy. His research had made him the leading authority on what many considered the most fascinating example of convergent mythological development in recorded history. As the countdown reached 0, the hall's ambient lighting dimmed, focusing attention on the central display, where a holographic representation of a bipedal creature materialized. The figure stood upright on 2 lower appendages, had 2 manipulator limbs protruding from its upper torso, and a rounded head with sensory organs clustered at the front. "Distinguished colleagues," Quills began, his voice resonating through the adaptive acoustic system. "Today, we continue our exploration of the most persistent xenomythological phenomenon, the legend of humans." The hologram rotated slowly, revealing the creature from all angles. "Note the improbable biological structure," Quills continued. "A fragile endoskeleton, exposed sensory organs, limited regenerative capabilities, and a complete absence of natural defenses. Yet somehow, according to the legends, these creatures supposedly dominated their original world and even traveled beyond it." A ripple of amusement moved through the audience. The gelatinous students in the back rows quivered with academic delight, while the silicon-based life forms clicked their crystalline appendages in scholarly appreciation. The human myth appears in over 6,000 distinct cultural narratives, spanning approximately 40,000 standard galactic cycles, Quills explained, his primary tentacles gesturing expressively. From the ice plains of Borealis 4 to the methane seas of Titan, virtually identical descriptions of these creatures emerge in folklore. Yet, no physical evidence has ever been discovered. He activated another display, showing a series of ancient artifacts, crude representations of the supposed humans carved in stone, etched into metals, or preserved in fossilized pigments. What makes the human myth particularly fascinating is the consistency of 4 core narrative elements that appear across all cultural boundaries. The display shifted to a bulleted list. First, the defiance narrative. Humans are invariably described as refusing to accept impossible odds. When faced with certain failure, these mythical creatures supposedly reject reality itself and create alternative solutions. Talvi, a hoverpod student in the front row, raised a sensory appendage. "Professor, couldn't that trait have evolutionary value? Persistence in the face of adversity?" "An excellent question," Quills replied. "But the narratives describe behavior that defies logical survival strategy. According to the myths, humans would sacrifice immediate biological advantage for abstract concepts: honor, justice, freedom. No evolved species would prioritize abstractions over survival." The student withdrew their appendage, satisfied with the explanation. Second, the cooperation paradox. Legends claim humans were simultaneously intensely individualistic, yet capable of spontaneous, large-scale cooperation. They supposedly fought constantly among themselves, but would unite instantly against external threats. Quills brought up comparative sociological data from the 17 major sentient classifications. All known species fall along the spectrum of either highly individualistic or collectivist. The myth describes a contradictory middle state that simply cannot exist in a stable evolutionary timeline. Third, the art obsession. Myths claim humans devoted enormous resources to creating objects, sounds, and images with no survival value whatsoever. They supposedly made art for its own sake, a concept that appears in no other species. The hologram shifted to display imaginary human artistic creations, swirls of color, representations of objects, and strange symbolic patterns. And finally, adaptation, acceleration. The most absurd aspect of the human myth claims these creatures could adapt to new environments and technologies at rates that violate all known biological constraints. According to legend, they could master new concepts within single lifespans rather than over evolutionary timescales. Quills paused dramatically, allowing his students to absorb the information. What we're examining is a fascinating example of parallel mythological development. The question before us is, why did so many diverse cultures independently create the same impossible creature? What psychological or sociological function did the human myth serve across such varied societies? Just as Quills was about to advance to his theoretical framework, a shrill alarm blared through the lecture hall. The emergency lighting system activated, bathing the room in pulsating amber. "Attention! Unidentified spacecraft detected in restricted orbital zone," announced the facility's security system. "Breach of academic perimeter in Sector 7. Security protocols engaging." Quills felt his secondary tentacles curl in irritation. "Remain calm, students. This is likely another student prank from the quantum engineering department. They're constantly violating—" Before he could finish, the lecture hall's main doors slid open with a mechanical hiss. The security system continued its warnings, but now they were drowned out by the sound of footsteps, actual bipedal footsteps, echoing through the suddenly silent hall. 6 figures entered the room, walking upright on 2 lower limbs, with exposed facial features and covered torsos. They moved with a strange fluid grace that seemed to defy the awkward biomechanics of their form. The lead figure, dressed in blue and white garments with shining emblems, raised one of its upper appendages in what appeared to be a greeting gesture. "Hi there," it said in perfect galactic standard. "Hope we're not interrupting anything important." The lecture hall erupted into chaos. Hoverpod students scattered toward the ceiling. Gelatinous students began rapidly changing colors, some even splitting into smaller duplicates out of pure shock. Crystalline students froze in place, their mineral structures vibrating at audible frequencies. "Security breach! Unknown entities!" Quills shouted, backing away from the podium. "Students, maintain academic composure!" The lead figure glanced at the holographic display still showing the mythical human, and let out a strange vocalization that might have been laughter. "Wow, they really got my nose wrong," it said, gesturing to its facial protrusion. "And what's with the proportions? I look like I've been stretched." Quills felt his respiratory sacs constrict. This was impossible. These creatures matched the description of humans with uncanny precision, from their bipedal stance to their clustered sensory organs, to their strange communicative vocalizations. "This is an outrage," Quills declared, struggling to maintain his academic authority. "I don't know what species you are or how you've disguised yourselves to resemble the mythological humans, but this disruption of academic proceedings is completely unacceptable." The lead figure approached the podium, moving with that unsettling fluid grace. Up close, Quills could see that its facial features were arranged in a configuration that somehow conveyed amusement. "Captain Jake Parker of the Earth exploration vessel Odyssey," the creature announced, then gestured to its companions. "This is Commander Alexei Vulov, Lieutenant Maya Torres, Dr. Omar Jackson, Lieutenant Fiona Murray, and Ambassador Diana Reeves." Quill's visual receptors dilated in shock. "I don't care what designations you've assigned yourselves. Humans are a myth, a convergent cultural narrative. You cannot possibly be humans because humans do not exist. Captain Parker exchanged glances with his companions. Well, this is awkward. We came to audit your class because we picked up the lecture topic on our comms. Thought it might be fun to see what you're teaching about us. He gestured vaguely around the room. Didn't expect quite this level of skepticism. One of the other creatures, the one designated Torres, had activated some kind of handheld device that emitted a soft blue light. Captain, I'm detecting trace temporal radiation signatures throughout the building, consistent with the patterns we found at the other sites. That's impossible, Quills sputtered. Temporal radiation is purely theoretical. It cannot be detected because it doesn't exist, just like you don't exist. The creature called Dr. Jackson stepped forward. Unlike the others who seemed amused, this one's facial configuration suggested concern. Professor Quills, is it? I understand your skepticism. Your academic framework doesn't allow for our existence. But I assure you, we are quite real. And we have a serious problem that may explain the confusion. Quills felt his academic dignity under assault. There is no confusion. The human convergence pattern appears in galactic mythology approximately 40,000 cycles ago, simultaneously across cultural boundaries. It's a classic example of parallel mythological development. Or, Dr. Jackson said gently, it's evidence of an actual historical event that became mythologized over time. The lecture hall had grown quieter now, as students recovered from their initial shock and leaned in to observe this unprecedented confrontation. Quills noticed Professor Melvadun, his academic rival, who had always argued for a historical basis to xenomyths, watching from the back of the hall with what could only be described as smugness. Let's approach this scientifically, Dr. Jackson continued. You have a theory. Humans are a myth that developed independently across cultures. We present contradictory evidence, actual humans standing before you. Good science requires adjusting theories when new evidence appears, doesn't it? Quills felt trapped in a logical corner. But your existence violates established xenobiological principles. The probability of a species evolving with your exact characteristics on a separate world is infinitesimal. Who said anything about parallel evolution? Commander Vulov spoke for the first time, his voice deeper than the others. We didn't evolve separately. We're all from Earth. One planet. One evolutionary history. But the myths appear in 6,000 cultural narratives across the galaxy, Quills protested. Lieutenant Torres raised her scanning device. The temporal radiation suggests an explanation. We believe humans were deliberately displaced throughout the galaxy's timeline by another civilization with advanced temporal technology. The implications struck Quills like a gravitational shockwave. If these creatures were telling the truth, it would mean, you're suggesting that humans actually existed, were scattered through time and space by some external force, and then their presence became mythologized as they disappeared? He asked, his voice barely audible. That's our working theory, Captain Parker confirmed. We've been tracking temporal anomalies across this sector for months. Your lecture on human myths pinged our cultural search algorithm, and we thought we might find answers here. Quills looked at the holographic display of the mythical human, then back at the actual humans standing before him. The resemblance was undeniable, though the real specimens were far more detailed and varied than the simplified representation. This is academically unprecedented, Quills muttered, his tentacles twisting in agitation. If what you're saying is true, then 40,000 cycles of xenomythological research would need to be completely reevaluated. Science advances when old ideas are challenged, Dr. Jackson said kindly. And right now, we need your help. If humans were displaced throughout time as we suspect, there may be important clues in the myths you've studied. Patterns that could lead us to whoever or whatever caused this temporal disruption. The lecture hall had fallen completely silent. Even Professor Melvadun seemed stunned by this turn of events. Quills felt the weight of hundreds of student gazes fixed upon him, waiting to see how he would respond to this fundamental challenge to established academic knowledge. After a long moment, Quills straightened his posture, extended his primary tentacles in a gesture of academic openness, and made the most difficult decision of his career. "Students," he announced, "today's lecture will be taking an unexpected direction. We appear to have living representatives of what we previously considered a mythological species. In the interest of scientific inquiry, I propose we revise our agenda to accommodate this new evidence." A murmur of excitement rippled through the lecture hall. "If these humans are willing," Quills continued, "perhaps they would consent to presenting their perspective on the myths we have studied." Captain Parker grinned, a facial expression that Quills found simultaneously disconcerting and fascinating. "We'd be delighted, Professor. Where would you like us to start?" "Perhaps," Quills suggested, recovering some of his academic composure, "with an explanation of the four consistent narrative elements I was discussing: the defiance narrative, the cooperation paradox, the art obsession, and the adaptation acceleration. Are these actual characteristics of your species, or mythological exaggerations?" Lieutenant Murray stepped forward, holding what appeared to be a small object made of processed vegetable matter. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward the demonstration area. Quills nodded cautiously. Murray placed the object on the display surface, and the scanning system immediately projected an enlarged, holographic representation. It was a simple carving of some kind, with no obvious functional purpose. "This is something I made during our journey here," she explained. "Just a piece of wood I shaped with a knife during off hours. It has no practical function. It doesn't help me survive or improve my efficiency. I made it because the act of creation itself was satisfying." A gelatinous student in the front row extended a pseudopod questioningly. "But why expend energy on something with no survival benefit?" Murray smiled. "Because being human isn't just about surviving. It's about finding meaning and beauty, even when they serve no practical purpose." She reached into another pocket and withdrew a small device, which she activated. A series of sounds filled the lecture hall, organized patterns of tones that rose and fell in complex arrangements. Several students recoiled, while others leaned forward in fascination. "This is what we call music," Murray explained. "Another form of art that serves no direct survival function, but has been part of human culture since before we had written language." Quills found himself strangely affected by the sound patterns. They seemed to create unusual resonances in his neural pathways. Not unpleasant, but definitely alien. "As for the defiance narrative," Captain Parker continued, "that's pretty accurate. Humans don't like being told something is impossible. We tend to take it as a challenge. But that's irrational," Quills subjected. "If something has a zero probability of success, expending resources attempting it is wasteful." "Maybe," Parker acknowledged with another of those disconcerting grins. "But we've achieved quite a few supposedly impossible things by refusing to accept failure, including finding our way back across temporal displacements that were meant to erase us from history." Dr. Jackson stepped forward. "The cooperation paradox is also accurate. Humans can be fiercely individual and even fight among ourselves, but we can also unite with remarkable speed when faced with external threats or challenges. It's not contradictory to us. It's just the dual nature of our social structure." "And adaptation acceleration?" Quills asked, finding himself genuinely curious despite his lingering skepticism. "Absolutely true," Commander Vulov confirmed. "Humans can learn and adapt to new environments and technologies within a single generation. It's how we've survived displacement across thousands of worlds and temporal periods. We don't wait for evolution. We create tools and technologies to adapt immediately." The implications were staggering. If these creatures were telling the truth, and the evidence of their physical presence was becoming difficult to deny, then one of the foundational principles of xenomythology would need to be reconsidered. What if other myths also had bases in historical reality? There's something else you should know, Lieutenant Torres interjected, her scanning device still active. The temporal radiation signatures suggest that whoever displaced humans throughout time didn't just scatter us physically. They appear to have attempted to erase our existence from the timeline itself. That's why humans became myths rather than historical records. But why? Asked Nexal, a blue-scaled student who had been silent until now. What purpose would erasing humans serve? Captain Parker's expression grew more serious. That's what we're trying to find out. And it's why the myths you've studied are so important. Professor Quills. They may contain clues about who did this to us and why. Quills felt his academic worldview shifting beneath him like unstable terrain. Yet, alongside the intellectual vertigo, came an unfamiliar sensation: excitement. If humans were real, and had been deliberately erased from history through temporal manipulation, it represented the most significant discovery in the history of xenomythology. Students, Quills announced, making a swift decision. Today, we have an unprecedented opportunity. I am formally redesignating this session from Advanced Xenomythology 101 to the inaugural class of Galactic Human Studies. Our visitors will serve as primary sources, and we will document this historic academic event for the Coalition archives. The announcement sent a wave of excitement through the lecture hall. Students who had been frightened moments before now extended sensory appendages in fascination, eager to observe the living myths in their midst. Professor, called Talvi, the hoverpod student, if humans actually exist, what other xenomyths might be based on historical realities? An excellent question, Quills replied, feeling himself on firmer academic ground. This discovery certainly opens the possibility that other mythological convergences might have similar explanations. The quantum beast myths, for instance, or the stellar navigators. Before we get too far into academic implications, Ambassador Reeves interrupted, speaking for the first time. There's an urgent matter to address. If our theory is correct, the civilization that displaced humans throughout time and space may still be active. Their technology could pose a threat not just to humans, but to all species in this sector. Quills felt a chill run through his vascular system. You believe this temporal manipulation could happen again? To other species? We don't know, Captain Parker admitted. But we didn't come here just to crash your lecture. We came because we need allies, scientists, researchers, and academics who can help us understand what happened and prevent it from happening again. The implications were clear. This wasn't merely an academic curiosity. It was potentially a matter of galactic security. Chancellor Vox must be informed immediately, Quills decided. This situation extends far beyond my department. If humans have truly been subjected to temporal displacement on a galactic scale, the entire coalition should be alerted. We've attempted contact with your galactic coalition before, Ambassador Reeves explained. Our transmissions were dismissed as pranks or misinterpreted signals. That's why we decided on a more direct approach. Quills understood the problem immediately. Because we believed humans were mythological, any communication claiming to be from Earth or humans would have been treated as nonsensical. Exactly, Reeves confirmed. We've been trying to establish first contact protocols for months, but it's difficult when the other party thinks you're a fairy tale. The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on Quills. An entire species trying to communicate with the galactic community, only to be ignored because academic consensus had already filed them under mythology. Students, Quills announced. Class is dismissed for today. Please prepare summary analyses of how this discovery affects our understanding of xenomythological convergence. Due next session. I will be escorting our guests to the Chancellor's office immediately. As the students began to disperse, many lingering to catch another glimpse of the mythical humans, Quills noticed Professor Melvadoon, approaching from the back of the hall. His academic rival's expression was unbearably smug. "Well, Quills," Melvadoon said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "It appears your parallel mythological development theory requires some revision. I've maintained for cycles that the human myths had a historical basis." Yes, Quills replied irritably, his tentacles coiling in annoyance. "Your viewpoint has been validated. However, neither of us anticipated that humans would physically appear in our lecture hall. So I'd suggest we both have significant theoretical adjustments ahead of us." Dr. Jackson, observing the exchange, stepped forward. "If I may, professors, this isn't about academic vindication. It's about uniting our knowledge to address a threat that affects all of us. The temporal displacement technology that scattered humans could potentially be used against any species." Melvadoon's smugness faded somewhat. "You believe whoever did this might target others?" "We don't know," Torres admitted. "But the level of technology required to manipulate timeline continuity on this scale is concerning, especially if it was used with hostile intent." Quills and Melvadoon exchanged glances, their academic rivalry momentarily forgotten in the face of this larger concern. "I propose a joint research initiative," Quills suggested, "combining my department's database of human mythological patterns with your historical reconstruction methodologies." "Agreed," Melvadoon replied without hesitation. "And we should bring in Professor Dunn from Quantum Temporal Studies. If there's actual temporal radiation as these humans claim, her expertise will be invaluable." As the two professors quickly sketched out a research framework, Captain Parker watched with an expression of relief. "You know," he commented to Dr. Jackson, "I was worried they might deny our existence even with us standing right in front of them." "The scientific method at its best," Jackson replied quietly. "When presented with irrefutable evidence, good scientists change their theories to match reality, not the other way around." The journey to Chancellor Vox's office required traversing the central campus of the Galactic Academic Coalition's flagship institution. As the unusual procession moved through the corridors, Quills and Melvadoon leading, the 6 humans following, and a growing entourage of curious faculty and students trailing behind, word spread rapidly throughout the campus. By the time they reached the administrative wing, a crowd had gathered, all straining to catch a glimpse of the supposedly mythical creatures now walking among them. "I feel like a zoo exhibit," Lieutenant Murray muttered. "Technically, we kind of are," Commander Vulov replied with a wry smile. The living embodiment of folklore, suddenly appearing in the flesh, Chancellor Vox's administrative assistant, a multi-limbed entity with compound visual receptors, nearly fell from its hovering platform when the group entered the outer office. "Professor Quills, Professor Melvadoon, what is the meaning of this disruption? And what are these creatures?" "Urgent matter for the Chancellor," Quills replied briskly. "These are humans. Yes, actual humans. And they bring information of critical importance to Coalition security." The assistant's visual receptors dilated in shock. "Humans? But that's impossible, mythological, academically untenable." "Yes, we've covered all that," Melvadoon interrupted. "Nevertheless, they are here, and the Chancellor needs to see them immediately." After a brief communication with the inner office, the assistant gestured toward the entrance portal. "The Chancellor will see you now. All of you," it added, eyeing the humans with unmistakable trepidation. Chancellor Vox was an imposing figure, even by the standards of their species, standing nearly 3 meters tall, with an exoskeleton that shimmered with the iridescent patterns indicating high academic and administrative rank. The Chancellor dominated the spacious office. "Professors," Vox began, multiple voice sacs vibrating at once to create a resonant tone of authority. "Your message indicated a matter of extraordinary importance. I assume it relates to these visitors." "Chancellor," Quills began, struggling to maintain his composure, I must report a discovery that will revolutionize the field of xenomythology and potentially impact coalition security protocols. These individuals are humans, the same creatures that have been documented in mythological narratives across thousands of cultures. Chancellor Vox's upper appendages stiffened in surprise. Humans? The mythological species? That's difficult to accept, Professor. With respect, Chancellor. Ambassador Reeves stepped forward. We understand your skepticism. We've encountered similar reactions throughout our attempts to establish contact with the Coalition. However, our existence is not the most pressing matter. We believe the temporal technology that scattered humans throughout galactic history could pose a threat to all species. Chancellor Vox studied the humans with analytical intensity. Even if I accept your identity, which challenges fundamental academic principles, what evidence do you have of this alleged temporal displacement? Lieutenant Torres activated her scanning device, projecting a holographic display of complex energy patterns. These are temporal radiation signatures we've detected at multiple locations across this sector, including within this very institution. They match theoretical models for timeline manipulation developed by our scientists. Professor Dunn, who had joined them en route to the Chancellor's office, leaned forward to examine the data. These patterns, they're consistent with my own research into quantum temporal instabilities. I've only observed them in laboratory conditions, never in naturally occurring phenomena. Because they're not natural, Captain Parker explained. They're technological signatures. Someone, somewhere, developed the capability to manipulate time streams and used it to scatter humans throughout galactic history, essentially erasing our unified presence from the timeline. Chancellor Vox absorbed this information with remarkable composure. If what you're saying is true, it represents both an unprecedented scientific discovery and a potential security concern of the highest order. Who would possess such technology, and what would motivate them to use it against your species? That's what we're trying to discover, Dr. Jackson replied. And why the mythological records studied by Professor Quills and others are so valuable. They may contain clues about who did this and why, clues that survived the temporal manipulation precisely because they were dismissed as myths. Chancellor Vox turned to Quills. Professor, in your expert opinion, could these individuals genuinely be members of the species documented in the convergent myths you've studied? Quills felt the weight of academic responsibility pressing upon him. To endorse this claim would mean overturning decades of his own published research. Yet the evidence before him was compelling. Chancellor, he replied carefully, when confronted with direct observational evidence that contradicts established theory, the proper scientific response is to revise the theory. These individuals match the mythological descriptions with unprecedented accuracy. They demonstrate the 4 core traits consistently associated with human myths. And most importantly, their explanation offers a coherent framework that resolves the puzzle of why human myths appear simultaneously across cultural boundaries. He straightened to his full height, making his declaration formal. It is my professional assessment that these are, indeed, humans, and that the convergent myths documented throughout the galaxy are likely cultural memories of actual historical encounters. Chancellor Vox was silent for a long moment, multiple sensory appendages twitching as they processed this information. Finally, they activated the office's communication system. Initiate emergency session of the Galactic Science Council. Priority Alpha. Subject: verification of supposedly mythological species and potential temporal security threat. Turning back to the assembled group, Vox continued. If your claims are verified, and I must emphasize that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, this would constitute a first contact scenario, albeit an unusual one. Ambassador Reeves, I understand you represent the human governmental authority. The United Earth Government, Reeves confirmed. Though our situation is complicated by the temporal displacement, from our perspective, We've been attempting to establish formal diplomatic relations with the Coalition for nearly a standard year. From the Coalition's perspective, you've been trying to establish diplomatic relations with beings we thought were mythological, Vox observed, with what might have been dry humor. No wonder there have been communication difficulties. Chancellor, Dr. Jackson interjected, while diplomatic relations are important, we must emphasize the urgency of investigating the temporal displacement technology. If whoever deployed it against humans still possesses this capability, they could potentially target other species, or use it in even more disruptive ways. Vox's sensory appendages quivered in acknowledgement. Agreed. I propose a three-pronged approach. First, formal verification of human identity through biological and historical analysis. Second, establishment of preliminary diplomatic protocols between the Coalition and your United Earth government. Third, and most urgently, a joint scientific investigation into the temporal displacement evidence. The Chancellor activated another communication channel. Prepare the Grand Auditorium for an emergency academic assembly. All departments, all disciplines, priority notification. Captain Parker raised an eyebrow. You're going public with this immediately? Captain, Vox replied. When fundamental academic principles are challenged by new evidence, the proper response is transparent evaluation. If humans are real and have been subjected to temporal manipulation as you claim, the entire Coalition academic community must be informed. Knowledge must be shared, especially knowledge that could affect our collective security. As preparations for the emergency assembly began, Quills found himself in the unusual position of coordinating with the very creatures he had, until recently, insisted were purely mythological. The irony was not lost on him. Professor, Dr. Jackson approached him as they waited. I want to thank you for your open-mindedness. Many academics would have doubled down on their theories despite contradictory evidence. Quills's respiratory sacs expanded in what approximated a sigh. The primary directive of scientific inquiry is to follow evidence wherever it leads, however uncomfortable the destination might be. If humans are real, then my life's work requires significant revision, but that is the nature of academic progress. Still, Jackson pressed, it can't be easy to have your fundamental assumptions challenged so publicly. Quills's tentacles twisted in a gesture of philosophical acceptance. Perhaps this is how science advances, not through gradual refinement, but through periodic revolutions when established frameworks collapse under the weight of new evidence. If humans are real, what other myths might be based on historical realities? The academic possibilities are exhilarating. Before Jackson could respond, Lieutenant Torres approached, her scanning device active. Dr. Jackson, Professor Quills, I'm detecting another temporal radiation spike, stronger than the ambient readings, and recent. Location? Jackson asked sharply. Within this building, Torres replied, adjusting her scanner. The signature is similar to what we found at the other sites, but with a distinctive harmonic pattern I haven't seen before. Quills felt a chill of academic excitement mingled with apprehension. The temporal displacement technology you've been tracking, you believe it's been used here recently? It's possible, Torres confirmed. The radiation patterns suggest temporal manipulation within the last 24 hours, local time. The implications were disturbing. If the unknown force that had scattered humans throughout time and space had been active here so recently, we need to inform the others, Quills decided. If temporal manipulation technology has been deployed within the Coalition's central academic institution, it represents a security breach of the highest order. As they moved to rejoin the main group, Quills found his perception of reality shifting. Hours ago, he had been preparing to deliver a routine lecture on mythological convergence patterns. Now, he was collaborating with living representatives of those myths to investigate what might be the most significant temporal security threat the Coalition had ever faced. The Grand Auditorium of the Galactic Academic Coalition was designed to accommodate representatives of all known sentient species. Tiered seating radiated outward from a central presentation area, with environmental controls that could create microhabitats suitable for everything from methane breathers to silicon-based crystalline entities. As academics from across the institution filed in, some rushing with obvious excitement, others maintaining an air of skeptical dignity, the humans waited in an antechamber with Chancellor Vox, Professors Quills, Melvedun, and Dunn. The coalition has never faced a situation quite like this, Vox admitted, multiple voice sacs vibrating with concern. A species we believed mythological, suddenly appearing with evidence of temporal manipulation that could threaten galactic security. From our perspective, it's equally surreal, Ambassador Reeves replied, discovering that throughout most of the galaxy, humans are considered legendary creatures, like unicorns or dragons in our own mythology. Dragons? Quills inquired, academic curiosity momentarily overriding more pressing concerns. Mythical reptilian creatures from Earth folklore, Dr. Jackson explained. Interestingly, they appear across multiple human cultures with remarkable consistency, similar to how human myths appear throughout galactic cultures. Quills's sensory appendages quivered with excitement. Perhaps another example of temporal displacement? If your dragons show the same convergence patterns as human myths do in our cultures? One mystery at a time, Professor, Captain Parker interjected with a smile. Let's focus on the immediate situation. Chancellor Vox activated a communication device. The assembly is ready. We will proceed with the formal introduction and presentation of evidence. Ambassador Reeves, as the diplomatic representative, would you be comfortable addressing the assembly first? Of course, Chancellor, Reeves agreed. Though I suspect the very fact of our physical presence will be more persuasive than any diplomatic statement I could make. The entrance to the Grand Auditorium slid open, revealing a vast chamber filled with thousands of beings from across the coalition. As Chancellor Vox led the group onto the central platform, a wave of astonished murmurs swept through the audience, rising to a cacophony of exclamations, queries, and expressions of disbelief in dozens of languages. Chancellor Vox raised multiple appendages in a gesture for silence, activating the auditorium's acoustical enhancement system. Esteemed colleagues of the Galactic Academic Coalition, today marks an unprecedented moment in our shared intellectual history. I present to you living representatives of a species previously classified as mythological, humans. The auditorium erupted again, academics of all species gesturing, vocalizing, or otherwise expressing their astonishment. Vox allowed the commotion to continue for several moments, before again signaling for silence. I understand your skepticism. It mirrors my own initial reaction. However, in accordance with coalition principles of evidence-based inquiry, I ask that you reserve judgment until you have heard and seen the evidence these individuals present. With that introduction, Ambassador Reeves stepped forward. Her voice, amplified by the acoustic system and simultaneously translated into all coalition languages, resonated through the chamber. Distinguished members of the Galactic Academic Coalition, I am Ambassador Diana Reeves of the United Earth Government. I stand before you as a representative of humanity, a species that, until today, you believed existed only in myths and legends. She paused, allowing the weight of her physical presence to reinforce her words. We understand your disbelief. From your perspective, humans have never been documented except in folklore. Yet here we stand, living proof that the myths you've studied have a basis in historical reality. Throughout the auditorium, recording devices activated as academics documented this unprecedented event. Sensory appendages of all varieties extended toward the platform, straining to capture every detail of the supposedly mythical humans. But our appearance here today is not merely to correct an academic classification, Reeves continued. We come with evidence of a grave threat, a technology capable of manipulating time streams and erasing species from their proper historical context. We believe this technology was used against humanity, scattering us throughout time and space, reducing our unified presence to fragments that survived only as myths in your cultural memories. At this statement, a new wave of academic exclamations filled the auditorium. The implications were staggering. Not just the existence of humans, but the suggestion of technological temporal manipulation on a galactic scale. Lieutenant Torres stepped forward with her scanning device, projecting its readings as a massive hologram visible throughout the auditorium. These are temporal radiation signatures we've detected across multiple locations, including within this institution. They indicate recent activation of technology capable of altering timeline continuity. Professor Dunn moved to Torres's side, her expertise in quantum temporal physics giving weight to her analysis. These patterns match theoretical models for deliberate timeline manipulation. They cannot be explained by natural phenomena or known technological processes. The presentation continued, with each human providing evidence and expertise from their respective fields. Dr. Jackson explained the anthropological implications of how human presence became mythologized across disparate cultures. Commander Vulov detailed the strategic concerns of an unknown force with temporal manipulation capabilities. Lieutenant Murray demonstrated human artistic expression, creating music that rippled through the auditorium in waves of organized sound. Throughout it all, Professor Quills watched the assembled academics with a mixture of fascination and concern. As the galaxy's leading expert on human myths, he was uniquely positioned to bridge the gap between what had been believed and what was now being revealed. Yet he also felt the weight of academic responsibility, ensuring that this paradigm shift was handled with appropriate scientific rigor. When his turn came to address the assembly, Quills moved to the center of the platform with deliberate formality. "Colleagues," he began, "as the author of Convergent Mythological Patterns, The Human Phenomenon, and primary investigator of the Xenomythological Database, I have devoted my academic career to understanding why the human myth appears consistently across cultural boundaries. Today, I must acknowledge that my fundamental premise was incorrect." A murmur ran through the audience. Such a public retraction from a scholar of Quills's stature was unprecedented. The evidence before us suggests that humans are not mythological constructs but historical entities, subjected to some form of temporal displacement that scattered them throughout our shared history. Their presence became mythologized precisely because they appeared and disappeared in ways that defied conventional historical documentation. Quills activated his own presentation display, showing the 4 core elements of the human myth that he had identified: the defiance narrative, the cooperation paradox, the art obsession, and the adaptation acceleration. These traits, which I previously interpreted as evidence of mythological construction, appear to be actual characteristics of human biology and psychology. Their seeming impossibility stems not from folkloric exaggeration, but from our limited understanding of evolutionary possibilities. He gestured toward the humans standing nearby. The mythological convergence pattern that has puzzled xenomythologists for generations now has a coherent explanation: cultural memories of actual encounters with humans, preserved despite temporal manipulation designed to erase them from our shared history. As Quills concluded his presentation, a student rose from the audience, Global, the diminutive gelatinous entity from his lecture earlier that day. "Professor Quills." Global's translator device rendered their bubbling vocalizations into coalition standard. "If humans were subjected to temporal displacement, as you suggest, and their existence became mythologized across our cultures, what does this tell us about the relationship between myth and history more broadly? Might other xenomythological convergences also represent displaced historical realities?" It was an incisive question that cut to the heart of the academic implications. Quills, felt a surge of academic pride despite the circumstances. An excellent inquiry. Student Global. Indeed. This discovery compels us to re-evaluate all instances of mythological convergence. The quantum beast myths, the stellar navigator legends, the dimensionless observers, all may need to be reassessed as potential historical entities subjected to similar temporal displacement. The academic discussion might have continued indefinitely. The implications for multiple fields were enormous. But Captain Parker stepped forward, gently redirecting attention to the more urgent matter. While these academic questions are fascinating, we must remember the immediate concern: the temporal displacement technology itself. If it was used against humans, it could be deployed against other species. We need to pool our knowledge and resources to locate the source of these temporal manipulations before they can cause further damage to the timeline. Chancellor Vox acknowledged the point with a formal gesture. Captain Parker is correct. This discovery has profound academic implications that will be explored for generations to come. But the security implications require immediate attention. Vox turned to address the full assembly. I am hereby establishing a joint temporal security task force, combining coalition scientific resources with human expertise. Professor Quills will lead the Xenomythological Analysis Division, working to identify patterns in myths that might reveal the identity or motives of whoever deployed this technology. Professor Dunn will head the Quantum Temporal Investigation Team, focusing on the radiation signatures and their implications. The assembly concluded with a formal protocol for verification and cooperation. The human delegation would provide biological samples and historical records to confirm their identity beyond academic doubt. In return, the coalition would share all mythological documentation related to humans, potentially providing clues about their temporal displacement. As the academics dispersed, many lingering to observe the humans more closely or engage them in preliminary questions, Quills found himself standing beside Captain Parker, watching the controlled chaos of this academic revolution. You know, Parker commented, when we decided to crash your lecture, I half expected to be thrown out as pranksters or delusional entities. I never imagined it would lead to a full coalition assembly and joint task force within hours. The academic community can move with remarkable speed when confronted with evidence that demands immediate attention. Quills replied, though I admit, the verification of a supposedly mythological species is unprecedented in coalition history. Parker smiled, a facial expression that Quills was beginning to recognize as indicating amusement or satisfaction. From myth to reality in a single day. That's got to be some kind of record. The truly remarkable aspect, Quills observed, is how closely your actual characteristics match the mythological descriptions. The 4 core elements I identified, defiance, cooperation, art, and adaptation, they're all demonstrably present in your behavior and history. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? Parker mused. If those traits survived in myths despite temporal manipulation designed to erase us, they must be pretty fundamental to who we are as a species. Before Quills could respond, Lieutenant Torres approached, her expression serious. Captain, Professor, the temporal radiation readings are intensifying. Whatever caused those signatures is still active, possibly within this very building. The implication was clear and disturbing. If the force responsible for displacing humans throughout time was present at the Coalition's central institution, it might be monitoring this very assembly, perhaps preparing to take action against this unexpected reunion of humans and the wider galactic community. We need to locate the source of those readings, Parker decided. If there's active temporal technology being deployed, we need to neutralize it before whoever's using it can react to our presence. Quills felt his academic excitement tempered by a new sensation, genuine concern for galactic security. If humans had been subjected to temporal displacement, as they claimed, and the technology responsible was still active, the Coalition has never faced a threat of this nature, he admitted. Our security protocols have no provisions for temporal manipulation. Then we'll have to write new protocols, Parker replied grimly. Starting with finding whatever's generating those radiation signatures. As they moved to join Torres and the others, Quills reflected on how completely his academic world had transformed in a single day. That morning, he had been preparing to lecture on the impossibility of humans as anything but mythological constructs. Now, he was collaborating with living humans to investigate a temporal security threat that could potentially affect the entire coalition. The lecture hall where this extraordinary day had begun was now empty of students, its holographic displays still showing the mythical human that Quills had been discussing when the actual humans arrived. As Torres led them back toward this location, following the intensifying radiation readings, Quills couldn't help but appreciate the symmetry. The strongest readings are coming from this area, Torres reported, her scanner indicating the lecture podium itself. Whatever's generating these temporal signatures, it's been here the whole time. Parker's expression hardened. Right under our noses. Can you pinpoint the exact source? Torres adjusted her scanner, its blue light intensifying as she moved it across the podium surface. There's something embedded in the structural material, something that doesn't match the surrounding composition. Quills activated the podium's diagnostic systems, something he'd never had reason to do before. The holographic display shifted, showing a structural analysis of the lectern itself. There, he indicated, highlighting an anomalous component. That doesn't appear in the original design specifications. It's been added, possibly quite recently. As they studied the mysterious object, Dr. Jackson joined them, his expertise in xenoanthropology providing a different perspective. If whoever deployed temporal displacement technology against humans is monitoring this institution, they would have needed a way to track any potential human activity, he reasoned. This could be both a surveillance device and a temporal beacon. But why here? Quills wondered. Why place it in a xenomythology lecture hall? Because, Jackson replied grimly, if humans ever managed to partially overcome the temporal displacement, they'd naturally be drawn to locations where their existence was being discussed, even if only as mythology. This was a trap, set for any humans who might find their way back. The implications were chilling. Whoever had scattered humans throughout time and space had anticipated the possibility of their return, and had prepared monitoring devices at locations where they might appear. We need to neutralize it without destroying it, Torres decided. If we can analyze its composition and functioning, it might lead us to whoever deployed it. As Torres and the technical team began the delicate process of extracting the device without triggering any defensive mechanisms it might contain, Quills found himself standing beside Dr. Jackson, both watching the procedure with focused attention. You know, Jackson commented quietly, in human mythology, there's a recurring motif called the return of the forgotten. Stories about beings or truths that were erased from memory, only to reappear when most needed. Another convergent pattern, Quills noted, one that now seems uncomfortably prophetic. Jackson nodded. Myths often contain deeper truths than we recognize. Perhaps that's why they persist, even when the historical realities behind them are obscured. If humans were deliberately erased from the timeline, Quills mused, yet stories of your existence survived as myths across thousands of cultures. It suggests something profound about the nature of reality itself. Perhaps time is more resilient than whoever deployed this technology anticipated. Or perhaps, Jackson suggested, certain truths simply refuse to remain hidden, no matter how sophisticated the attempt to erase them. As Torres carefully extracted the mysterious device, a small, crystalline object that pulsed with an inner light, unlike any technology Quills had encountered, he felt a sense of academic purpose stronger than any he had experienced in his career. The mystery of human myths had been solved in the most unexpected way possible, but it had immediately given rise to a far greater mystery. Who had attempted to erase humans from history? And why? The device now secured in a temporal containment field. Torres straightened up with a look of grim satisfaction. We've got it. And it's definitely still active. Or was, until we isolated it. It's been transmitting data consistently, probably since it was installed. Transmitting to where? Parker asked the critical question. That, Torres replied, is what we need to find out. And when we do, we'll have our first real lead on whoever has been manipulating the timeline. Quills looked at the contained device, then at the humans standing in his lecture hall, living embodiments of what he had, until today, insisted were merely myths. The academic irony was almost too perfect. A xenomythologist discovering that the subjects of his study were not only real, but had been deliberately mythologized through temporal manipulation. Whatever we discover, he said with newfound determination, the Coalition stands ready to assist. If one species can be erased from their proper historical context, any species could be similarly threatened. This is no longer merely an academic concern. It's a matter of existential security for all sentient beings. Captain Parker nodded, extending a hand in what Quills now recognized as a human gesture of agreement and alliance. After a moment's hesitation, physical contact between different species always required careful cultural consideration. Quills extended one of his primary tentacles in response. As they completed this symbolic gesture, the holographic display behind them shifted, showing the revised curriculum title, Galactic Human Studies 101. Beneath it, a subtitle appeared, From Myth to Reality, Rediscovering Humanity's Place in Galactic History. The academic revolution had begun, and with it, a new chapter in the relationship between humans and the wider galactic community, a relationship that would now be built on historical truth rather than mythological misconception. As students began to filter back into the lecture hall, news of the extraordinary events having spread throughout the campus, Quills prepared to address them in his new capacity as coordinator of the Coalition's first Human Studies program. Students, he began, feeling the weight of academic responsibility and historical significance. Today, we embark on an unprecedented intellectual journey. The boundary between myth and reality has been redrawn. What we once studied as folklore has been revealed as history, altered and obscured, but history nonetheless. He gestured to Captain Parker and the other humans, who had agreed to serve as primary sources for this inaugural session. The four core elements of what we called the human myth, defiance, cooperation, art, and adaptation, are not mythological constructs, but actual characteristics of a species that was nearly erased from our shared timeline. In studying them, we are not merely advancing academic knowledge. We are helping to restore a historical continuity that was deliberately broken. Global, the diminutive gelatinous student who had asked such an insightful question during the assembly, raised a pseudopod. Professor, if humans were subjected to temporal displacement and their existence became mythologized, does that mean they were never truly erased? That even the most sophisticated temporal technology couldn't completely remove them from history? Quills considered the profound implications of this question. An excellent point, Student Global. It appears that reality has a certain resilience, despite technological intervention designed to erase humans from the timeline. Echoes of their existence persisted as myths. Perhaps this suggests fundamental limitations to temporal manipulation, or perhaps it tells us something deeper about the nature of truth itself. Captain Parker, standing beside Quills at the lectern, smiled at the philosophical turn of the discussion. In human culture, we have a saying, the truth will out. It means that no matter how hard someone tries to hide or suppress the truth, eventually, it finds a way to be revealed. A remarkably apt sentiment, Quills agreed, and one that seems particularly relevant to our current situation. As the class continued, with humans answering questions about their biology, psychology, culture, and history. Quills observed the students' reactions. What had begun as fear and confusion had transformed into academic fascination and genuine curiosity. The supposedly impossible creatures from myth were not only real, but were engaging directly with the students, challenging assumptions and expanding understanding in real time. It was, Quills reflected, the purest form of academic discovery, the moment when established knowledge gave way to new understanding, when the boundaries of what was known expanded to encompass previously unimagined possibilities. The temporal displacement device, now secured in Professor Dunn's laboratory for analysis, remained a concerning reminder that this academic revolution had emerged from what appeared to be a deliberate attempt to erase an entire species from history. Whatever force had deployed that technology might well react to the human reappearance and the Coalition's newfound awareness. But for now, in this lecture hall where myth had become reality, the focus was on rebuilding what had been lost, the historical connection between humans and the wider galactic community. Each question answered, each myth clarified with factual context, represented another thread rewoven into the fabric of a shared history that had been deliberately unraveled. To conclude today's session, Quills announced, as the scheduled time approached its end, I would like to acknowledge something that, as an academic, I find both humbling and exhilarating. The foundation of my life's work has been overturned in a single day. Yet rather than experiencing this as a failure, I recognize it as the essence of scientific progress, the willing abandonment of cherished theories when new evidence demands it. He gestured to the humans standing beside him. These individuals were classified as mythological, not because of insufficient evidence, but because of deliberate temporal manipulation. Their reappearance challenges not only xenomythology, but our understanding of reality itself. And that challenge, colleagues, is the greatest gift any academic could receive: the opportunity to reimagine what we thought we knew, to rebuild our knowledge on a more accurate foundation. As the students filed out, many lingering to observe the humans more closely or to pose additional questions, Quills found himself standing beside Dr. Jackson, watching the interactions with academic interest. You've handled this paradigm shift with remarkable grace, Professor, Jackson commented. Many academics would find it far more difficult to abandon their established theories so completely. The pursuit of knowledge must always take precedence over the preservation of ego, Quills replied. Besides, this is hardly the end of xenomythology. It's the beginning of a far more fascinating field of study. If humans were mythologized through temporal displacement, how many other myths might have similar explanations? The academic possibilities are expansive. And the security implications equally significant, Jackson added more soberly. Whoever deployed this technology against humans could potentially use it against other species. The Coalition's assistance will be invaluable in tracking down the source. As they spoke, Lieutenant Murray approached, carrying the small wooden carving she had shown earlier. Professor, I wanted you to have this, she said, offering the simple artifact. As a reminder that sometimes the most meaningful things have no practical purpose at all. Quills accepted the carving with careful tendrils, examining its intricate patterns. Art for its own sake, he mused. One of the supposedly impossible traits of the human myth, now proven to be entirely real. Not just real, Murray replied with a smile, but essential to who we are. We create not just to survive, but to find meaning beyond survival. As the humans prepared to depart for their temporary quarters within the Coalition facility, Captain Parker turned to Quills with a final observation. You know, Professor, there's a certain irony to all this. For centuries, humans told stories about making first contact with alien civilizations. Yet when it finally happened, it wasn't us discovering you. It was you rediscovering us, after we'd been reduced to myths in your cultures. Perhaps, Quill suggested. That's a more fitting narrative than either of us could have imagined. Not conquest or colonization, but rediscovery and reconnection. The restoration of a historical continuity that someone tried very hard to break. Parker nodded thoughtfully. And whoever they are, they're still out there. The temporal device proves that. They know we're here now, and they know we're working together. Then, together, we shall remain, Quills declared, his academic formality giving way to genuine conviction. Whatever force attempted to erase humans from history, they will soon discover that myths have a remarkable power. The power to preserve truths that might otherwise be lost, until the day comes when those truths can be fully revealed. As the humans departed, Quills remained in the lecture hall, studying the holographic display that now showed accurate biological data rather than mythological speculation. The title, Galactic Human Studies 101, glowed softly above images of the actual humans who had, in the span of a single day, transformed from legendary creatures into historical allies. Tomorrow, the Joint Task Force would begin its work in earnest, analyzing the temporal device, searching for its source, preparing for whatever might come next. But tonight, Quills would revise his lecture notes, transforming decades of mythological analysis into the foundation for a new field of study, one based not on folklore, but on the living reality that had literally walked through his door. The myth had become flesh, the legend had become history, and the academic adventure was just beginning.